My name's Connor. This is Sunny, and we're here with Ambrose from Dignity and Power Now, and we're going to talk about incarceration in LA and other activism issues, as I understand it. We've been wanting to have you on this for a while, since we talked about JusticeLA and their push to change the prison system in Los Angeles. In 2019, as I understand it, they had major victory. They
We got the county to cancel their contract to expand.
it was
Central
about
Jail.
$2 billion, right?
Over $3 billion. Yeah.
3.5
Yep.
as they calculated it.
Yep.
And so that money is now being directed towards community policing and activism and other ways of managing problem individuals.
Well,
Would that be a bad way to describe it?
yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
A couple different things. First off, our focus in LA is the jail system. So there's a couple different, there's the jail system and then there's the prison system. So there's also, a simultaneous movement going on that really targets the prison system, where people go after they've been sentenced, sentence and their case is resolved. In LA County, the jail system houses both people who have been sentenced and people who have not been sentenced, and that's described as the pretrial population. So there has been no disposition on their case, and often they're held in simply because they can't afford to pay bail.
Right.
And here in LA County, I think it's about 47.7. So almost 50% of the people in the jails here are pretrial. And the jail population is almost 14,000 people right now. So if you think about that, that's a little bit under 7,000 people have not been convicted of any crime.
They're just being held.
They're just being held.
And they're being held in horrendous conditions in the
Yes.
men's central jail, as I understand it. And
Oh, yeah.
they've been trying to shut it down, but that seems to be dragging out.
Yeah, well, so going back to the original framing that you had, Connor, the money that was going to build this extension of men's central jail, ideally, it would be directed into community care. We fight against community policing. We're an abolitionist coalition and organization, and community policing is not the answer. And also, no one should be characterized as a problem individual. To us, there are so many reasons, underlying reasons, and root causes of what's described as criminality. And often those root causes are just, people not having their basic needs met: food, housing, support for mental health issues, support for substance use issues. So ideally, the money that would have gone to expand the jail should go to community-based care. And in 2020, I believe it was, the voters here in LA passed Measure J, where a percentage of the county's unrestricted funds, the voters said that money needs to go to communities that have been historically underinvested in. Black and brown communities in LA, queer communities, small businesses. And the issue now, and so ultimately that should have been over $900 million.
Right.
But of course, LA County is
Shady.
molasses and shady, molasses on implementation and totally shady, So that money, some of that money we're almost 3 years out now from that vote. And this was passed by majority of LA County voters. And some small organizations haven't even seen a single dollar of that money yet. So there have been the voters multiple times in the last 4 years have said, we need the county to hold the sheriff's department accountable. Measure A was passed this past November, which would amend the county charter to give the Board of Supervisors power to impeach a sitting sheriff. This is like post Villanueva. And that was Measure A. And then Measure J was, 3 years before that, 2 years before that. And Measure R was also related to investment in community services. And the voters have overwhelmingly said, let's hold the sheriff accountable and let's, move money out of the carceral system into community-based care. It's now a matter of just getting the county to actually implement that.
Was there any sort of like community oversight from that?
Yes.
And transparency with that? Because that's my big concern with just handing people blank checks, essentially, is that a lot of it can be, there will be people who want to take advantage and abuse it, unfortunately.
We have two ongoing themes on this show.
Okay.
One of them was the causes of violence and community problems, and I'm glad that you focused on the environment as the chief cause of people's difficulties in life. And the other one is why aren't these problems being fixed?
Yeah.
And that seems to be in part because of the sluggishness of the bureaucracy. And because it's clear that people want this. On Holly Mitchell's website, there it is. It's Care First, Jails Last, the slogan. And the other one is where the money's going and the need to have control over that, or some measure of power over that from the public's perspective.
Yeah, I think that brings up a couple different things. The county's not writing blank checks to anyone. Like, in order to receive money from the county through what is formerly Measure J, now known as Care First Community Investment, there are all of these hoops that organizations have to jump through. Like, nobody is just getting a blank check. In fact, actually, getting money and contracting with the county to be a service provider, to be receiving county money, it is just so prohibitive. Like, small organizations are basically written out of the county contracting equation because they don't have the infrastructure. Maybe they employ formerly incarcerated folks. And, that's something that we at Dignity and Power Now, we are specifically about uplifting and developing leadership of formerly incarcerated people and their families. And Dignity and Power Now, we have a lot of formerly incarcerated folks who lead the work in our organization. And to contract with the county, some county contracting requirements basically say if you have a criminal record, we're not going to contract with you. So orgs that actually should need the money the most and should be receiving the money.
So just a criminal record regardless of what the crime was, even if it wasn't even violent.
Potentially, yes.
Wow, okay.
Yeah. And so there is a oversight body that was created by the county called Care First Community Investment Advisory Body, CFCI. And this is a community advisory body, but again, you have to be appointed to this by either a board of supervisor or another county department. And this body meets every other week and provides recommendations to the county on where this Measure J money should go. And so it is a collaborative process with this advisory body saying, okay, our priorities, permanent supportive housing. Our next priority is harm reduction. Our next priority is mental health care. They parse this out and say this amount of money should go here, and then it's passed along to the CEO of LA County, Fezia Davenport. A lot of people don't know that LA County is a CEO, and the CEO actually is the one who signs the checks, decides the budget. And what has happened is that the Care First Community Investment Advisory Body has provided recommendations to the county about where the Measure J money should go. And in some instances, the CEO has just shut that down. Said, no, okay, you're recommending $50 million go to harm reduction and safe injection sites. Well, actually, we're not going to do that. We're going to give that $50 million to interim housing, which is great.
Right.
But where is the accountability there if the community advisory body is recommending this and then the CEO is just shutting that down? Then what's even the point of having community recommendations?
No, I agree. Yeah. Like, even if there's no point. Like you literally just said, there's no point in doing all that if they're just going to go, nah. Like, we know we asked you to do all these things and create recommendations for us, but we're just going to do it our way instead.
Seems to be another instance of the dichotomy between public power and private individual power in the government.
Yeah. And there still is a point, though, and that's that to show where the system breaks down. So like these recommendations are created, and then it actually reveals, okay, who actually has the power in this instance? The CEO's office, the board of supervisors. And so it also is something that motivates community organizing, because then people who have been involved in providing these recommendations, it's a public meeting, so community members can also show up to have their voices heard around CFCI recommendations. These community members, when they see that the CEO has just vetoed all of the recommendations, they don't just say, okay, our job's done. In fact, actually, it's a rallying cry and a call to step into the work to hold the county accountable for their promises.
That seems to be a key part of organizing public efforts for change, is directing community members to go to board meetings and have their voices heard. Is that part of the primary goals of Dignity and Power Now and how they exercise their power?
Yeah, I think so. There's Dignity and Power Now is an organization that anchors one of the anchor organizations for the JusticeLA Coalition, which is a large coalition of 60 different organizations and individuals who are focused and have a unified goal of abolition in LA County, reclaiming money out of the carceral systems, the sheriff's department, the probation department, the jails, reinvesting that in communities, and also shutting down the jails. And
that gets to the organization of these coalitions, because that's not the only coalition that Dignity and Power Now is an anchor of, right?
Yeah, that's true. We also, Dignity and Power Now anchors a statewide coalition, Care First California, that's all about pretrial reform. But going back to your question about the Board of Supervisors, so one thing that JusticeLA has done since the beginning is showing up at county meetings, really specifically the Board of Supervisors, to exactly have community members' voices heard. But this isn't easy. It's not everyone has the confidence and capacity to show up in person at a Board of Supervisors meeting and provide public comment. It's really stressful for people. And so what JusticeLA does is support people through the entire process. One, just learning about what is the Board of Supervisors? Who do they have control over? Why is it important that we're there? Why is it important that we have our voices heard? And who are the individual Board of Supervisors? Who is your board representative? So we support people with that basic political education information before we even ask someone, hey, show up, go to the Board of Supervisors tomorrow and give public comment.
Right.
It's important for people to understand the structure that we're working against right now. And a lot of that polyed focus is also supporting formerly incarcerated folks who have been inside of LA County jails to be the ones at the forefront of having their voices heard. And a lot of people have never given public comment before. So, as I said, it's just a matter of supporting with some political education around the Board of Supervisors and their power, and then showing, okay, what does it look like to give public comment? What is effective, both in terms of getting your point across and having it be fulfilling for you during the process? Because some people just want to speak about advocacy and policy, and others want to tell their story about what they experienced by police violence. They've lost a family member inside of the jails, and we're there to support the crafting of those comments. And the Board of Supervisors right now, they do both virtual and in person. And it's really hard and designed to prohibit people who work full time from having their voice heard. So right now, the Board of Supervisors is meeting literally as we speak. And the meeting goes typically from 9:30 in the morning till past 4 p.m. in the afternoon. They have sometimes upwards of 50 agenda items. And each agenda item has public comment. So say you are interested in giving public comment around a motion that's related to tenants' rights. That motion, you may show up at 9:30. That motion may not be heard till 3 p.m. Who has capacity to take that entire day out of their work week to go sit at the Board of Supervisors to give comment? So what we also do is support people giving written comment. You can write a letter, and we, through Justice LA and our virtual action network, will collect written comment from hundreds of people every single Board of Supervisors meeting and send that to the board.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah, no, for real. Getting more people involved with the Board of Supervisors is actually very important.
So if somebody wanted to do this who was listening to this, where would you direct them?
Well, you could go to our website, JLA Now, or JusticeLANow.org. I should probably actually know the web URL off the top of my head, but you also can register for the Justice LA virtual actions, and maybe I can plug that at the end if that's cool with you.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll put it in the show notes.
I can plug a lot of links. The virtual actions are an incredible opportunity to get involved if it's your first time getting involved in, municipal government advocacy, or it's like your 7th year. The virtual actions through Justice LA, what it is we have them twice a week, and people meet on Zoom if you want to join that part of it. You meet on Zoom to learn about what the action is. So, for example, today's action is giving public comment at the Board of Supervisors. So we have a group of people who met at 9 a.m. this morning on Zoom. And what they do is support each other in giving public comment. So you're on Zoom, you're hanging out with folks, you're, supporting each other, saying like, you can do this. You go over your public comments before you're called on. But yesterday, we had a virtual action where people gather on Zoom to learn about, okay, these are the agenda items that we're going to be talking about tomorrow. Then we send out text messages. That group of people on Zoom send out text messages to a list of about 1,400 people saying, will you take this action with us today? And the people on that text list have signed up for this. It's not like just a random, election text you get from Nancy Pelosi. Like, this is something that you sign up for because you're interested in participating in this. And we send those texts twice a week, and we'll say, do you want to take this action with us? It'll give a little bit of context, and then it will direct you to a document, a Google Doc, a letter template that you can use to take the action. And the actions range from Board of Supervisors comments to calling city council members directly to statewide stuff, so emailing state legislators, to also very basic things like join us for a community meeting, sign up here. So we have a lot of actions, virtual actions, and our community partners ask us to sort of mobilize that infrastructure, and we do it twice a week.
Do you think that this method of organizing has had an effect over the past few years?
Oh, I mean, definitely. So we actually have, as I spoke about earlier, Measure A was passed in this past election, and we mobilized the virtual action infrastructure for weeks. So in order to get a measure on the ballot, the Board of Supervisors needs to approve it 3 times. So it comes up to a vote at the Board of Supervisors, 3 different board meetings. Then if it's passed, it can go onto the ballot and voters can vote. So we needed to push the board members to vote in favor of this so it could make it on the ballot. And we mobilized the virtual action team to send thousands of letters and make thousands of calls. And Janice Hahn, who is supervisor of District 4, said explicitly in her comments on the floor of one of the board meetings that originally she was against Measure A and was not going to vote in favor of it. But it was the thousands of calls and emails and letters that she got that showed her what the community wanted. And ultimately, she voted in favor of Measure A.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I might be wrong, but was she who voted against closing the men's central jail because there was not a good ulterior option to house those men?
I believe that was Catherine Barger, actually.
Okay.
Barger, who's supervisor of District 5.
Because it seems like a legitimate worry that there's no ulterior plan to change the system. There's no option B.
There actually are. There's option B, there's option C, there's option D.
Great.
So
they're just expensive and no one wants to actually put the time in to doing them.
But they're less expensive than maintaining the jails
Right.
and paying the sheriff's department $3.4 billion a year. That's the sheriff's department annual budget.
Mm-hmm.
That's the sheriff's department.
I want to get into policing, but there's 2 other things we want to talk about, and one of them was this more complicated method of organizing relative to going out into the streets and protesting en masse. And the cynics over the past few years have, critiqued Black Lives Matter as both this movement and this organization, and accused the founders of embezzling funds. And the question is, what effects have these mass protests had towards reforming policing and incarceration?
Dignity and Power Now and the JusticeLA Coalition, we're not about reforming policing. We're about abolishing the police and sheriff's departments. And I do think here in LA County, even prior to the summer of 2020, there was deep movement organizing happening in LA County, since the as far back as I know, like 80s, 70s.
Pre-Watts riots.
Yes. And Dignity and Power Now started, I believe, in 2012 as a result of people who were organizing after losing loved ones to sheriff violence. And out of Dignity and Power Now, there came like the Check the Sheriff Coalition, and all of this was led by families who have experienced violence by the sheriff's department. And this created sort of a groundswell prior to 2020, and the contract to expand Men's Central Jail, the board voted to cancel that at their last meeting before lockdown. So the summer of 2020 hadn't happened yet. Yet it was the on-the-ground protesting and the community advocacy that led to the cancellation of that contract. Also prior to the summer of 2020, the county established the Sheriff Civilian Oversight Commission, which, again, was the result of decades of advocacy and organizing led by these families, led by family members whose sons and brothers and sisters and moms were killed by the sheriff's department. And they advocated for a sheriff accountability body, and out of that came the Sheriff Civilian Oversight Commission. That was prior to the summer of 2020. So a lot of these things were in place before the summer of 2020 and the George Floyd protests. And what I do think is that the protests nationwide brought spotlight onto the movement work that was already happening in communities, the movement work that was already happening in Minneapolis, in New York City, in Los Angeles, in Louisiana.
Ideally, if you're going out and getting angry and protesting with your compatriots, you're graduating to the next level of community organizing.
Yeah, well, I don't even think it's the next level, because there are so many different ways to be involved in organizing and advocacy and fighting for the abolition of the carceral state and investment in communities. And so some people may just be more attuned and more equipped to be there protesting. Some people can't protest for many reasons because they physically aren't able to. Maybe they work and aren't able to make it. And so doing many things at once, protesting and also doing, direct advocacy through contacting, government officials, departments,
right,
et
holding them
cetera.
accountable and actually making them do their job.
Yeah, but then also base building and really meeting with community members, learning from the people who are affected by the systems the most, learning about what's their priority and how can we work with them so they lead the movement. And so there's all of these different ways to be involved, and no one of them is, more courageous or admirable than the other.
Why are you more for abolition as opposed to community policing?
Oh,
yeah, let's get into the effects of these protests and the goals. Yeah.
Well, abolition is both
Well, I should say, what is your definition of abolition? Because I've seen many different interpretations of it.
And people get scared when they hear the
Yeah.
term defund the police.
For sure, for sure. Well, I don't think there's one fixed definition of abolition. I think that abolition, Angela Davis describes abolition as both a method and a practice and a vision. And so abolition is one, living your life every day with the purpose of rooting out the structures of white supremacy, developing ways for community accountability that don't involve the carceral state, and bringing also decentering and not decentering, but uplifting the work of women of color, of Black organizers who have really led this work historically. And why abolition and not reform? You can't reform something that is rotten to the core. You need to just throw that away. And nothing about policing or about the jail system or about the prison system works. And if you what do you mean by work? By working, it's people use the excuse and justification for having jails and prisons. Oh, we need to, quote, reform people. We're all about rehabilitation. The thing is that none of that addresses why somebody maybe stole that backpack with a laptop in the first place. None of that does. And you go to jail and prison, you're not going to then suddenly walk out of jail and prison with guaranteed basic income, food in your fridge, and care for your family. And those are often the root causes of why somebody did steal that backpack with a laptop, because they need money. And we can't reform a sheriff's department and a police department. And here in LA County, the sheriff's department is run by deputy gangs, by people, by deputy gangs, where their goal is to enact violence upon communities. Their initiation is, how many people inside of Men's Central Jail can you beat up? And the thing is when we talk about defunding the police, Miriam Kaba says defund the police is the ground floor. It's like literally the lowest. It's the ground floor. It's not something that we need to think about 10 years from now. It needs to be a foundation for all of this work, because how can you say that a county cares about community when LA County invests $3.4 billion a year in the sheriff's department and less than half of that in mental health care? Probably less than a third of that in permanent supportive housing, less than $1 million in permanent supportive housing. So, and people are still suffering.
Yeah, the cynic would say this is all very idealistic, but there are some people that are just going to commit crimes that are just bad. You have to take them away from society in some measure because there's no other way, and there would always be some small minority of people that you couldn't help, and you needed jails for some purpose like that, and that's what police are there for.
Well, a couple things. Most people, over 50% of the people in LA County jails, suffer from serious mental health needs. So, somebody who is having a schizophrenic episode and walking around with a knife, what they need is not going to jail.
No, they don't. Yeah.
No. What they need is round-the-clock clinical care and support for their mental health needs. And so that honestly addresses most people who are inside of the jails and a majority of people who are committing violent crimes. And the thing is that police and policing does not make communities safer, period. We've seen this. And pouring more money into the sheriff's department is actually not going to support those individuals who are the most seriously mentally those individuals who have the most serious mental health needs, who may be the ones committing the most violent crimes.
Foucault would say that the police are not there simply to make the community safer for those who are in need of help, but to make the government's power visible for the people who think that there are enemies in the public to them. How can you convince those people who want the police there for the government's power that they don't have enemies in the community?
Well, I think how do we convince the folks that want police because they want to see government power on the day to day?
Yeah, the conservative critique of the police abolitionist movement is that they hear from, this is in the Wall Street Journal and in conservative publications like The Bulwark, they'd say, well, we go to these meetings where the public gets to have a roundtable with the police and ask them for more or less policing.
Okay.
And then over and over again, the people that go to those meetings want more police in their communities. They want to see police on the corner.
I see.
They want to feel protected.
Well, most of the time, those folks haven't been offered an alternative. And so when all you know is, oh, this cop will remove somebody who's threatening my family, that's all you know, and you will continue to rely upon that structure. It's really important to introduce alternative structures of conflict resolution, alternative structures of addressing mental health needs, addressing houselessness, addressing drug use. Right now, and this is because, since Jim Crow, even before that, I mean, police came out of slave patrols. So the policing system is designed to maintain a structure of white supremacy, period.
And a dominant ideology.
Yes, and a dominant ideology. And the United States, both federally and then states themselves and counties, have incentive to continue to invest in this department because it maintains certain structures of power and not provide any idea, vision of an alternative.
Or an investment in the communities that need help.
Exactly. So, if there's $300,000 that is invested in harm reduction, that's like a safe injection sites. So people who are drug users, rather than using on the street and being exposed to potential overdose without any support, they can use in safe injection centers. Okay, so imagine $300,000 is going to that instead of investing in the police department, and a community is able to see, oh wow, I don't have to administer Narcan, once a month because we have now this new structure. I don't have to then rely on the police anymore.
I wanted
yeah.
to get to alternative structures from the beginning, and so I tried to start with that. And one of them definitely is safe injection sites, and others are, I can't remember the names, but basically rehabilitative projects that focus on keeping the people who would otherwise be incarcerated within contact with their social networks, because that's one of the big problems of taking people to jail is they're withdrawn from everything that would help them.
Yes.
So could you talk about some of those alternatives as well, not just safe injection sites, but alternatives to incarceration?
Definitely. In fact, after LA County voted to cancel the expansion of Men's Central Jail in 2020, and this was also happening around the same time, is the county convened what was known as ATI, Alternatives to Incarceration Work Group. It was a huge, years-long effort that involved county departments and community members to write a plan. There's like an over 100-step plan for alternatives to incarceration. Exactly what you were just talking about, which is, and detailed, really, how many people do we need to develop this infrastructure? What type of money, what type of monetary investment is needed to develop this infrastructure? And that stems all the way from prior to anyone being arrested to after somebody's being released. So this report, the ATI report, the Care First Jails Last report, addresses that entire spectrum of potential involvement in the criminal legal system. And so what those structures look like is, first off, how do we stop people from entering jail in the first place? Well, we need to think about in law enforcement. You know, if a sheriff's deputy is arresting someone who's just sitting outside of the 7-Eleven for being disruptive and they have, you know, a small amount of drugs on them. Well, what if that was just first of all, what if that person was never arrested or never cited in the first place? That would be ideal. But say the law enforcement officer is going to cite someone. Well, let's think about cite and release, where they're never actually taken to jail. They just have a mechanism by which they need to come to court for their court appearance. But why the county is resistant to even starting there is they're afraid of people failing to show up to court. Well, what's the answer to that? Investing in the structures that get people to court. Alternative models like the Bail Project. They use community release with support, meaning somebody's bailed out. They are, you know, supported by their community, and the Bail Project will support them, getting them rides to their court appearance, reminding them when's your court date, providing them with job resources. Okay, so your court date is in 2 months. Until you have to go to court, what are you going to do during that time? Let's support you with resume building, getting a job, you know, maintaining your job, getting a new job. So that's one example of a community release with support model that addresses the failure to appear, which is a justification that the county uses to not expand cite and release and not and pursue holding people in on bail during the pretrial phase. So that's one alternative model to incarceration. Don't keep people in jail during pretrial, release people in their community, but invest in these models that will support somebody both thriving in their community and then also getting to court if they need to get to court. And this is also like court reminders. So one thing that the JusticeLA Coalition did that was really led by the Fund for Guaranteed Income, another LA County organization, is create something called courtreminders.org. So if you have a court case going on or a family member has a court case going on, you can sign up for a text message reminder service that will also connect you with the public defender's office that will ask you, you know, what do you need to make it to court, and we can help get you there.
If almost 50% of the people in the LA jail system right now are being held without trial as a gross constitutional violation, right? But opponents of bail reform or bail abolition would cite one-off cases like the guy in Minneapolis.
Which guy?
Who drove through a crowd of people when he was they would cite those very extravagant and emotional cases in which somebody out on bail did something terrible. How would you respond to that fear that someone who's arrested in some way is therefore dangerous?
Well, I mean, it's total fear-mongering, and those are one-off cases. So nobody talks about this person, I guess, in Minneapolis. What kind of support were they receiving when they were released without bail? Was there any support? I mean, counties often don't have those structures themselves. And so hopefully this person was connected with a community-based organization that was providing them with potentially mutual aid for their families, connecting them with mental health resources. And so I think that we are all about abolishing bail. You know, we are all about a presumption of release across the board. People should be released pre-trial. But you can't just end it there. There needs to be a simultaneous investment in the services that will support people during that time period. And so these articles about, you know, that one person where they never cite the lack of supportive services that the county, that the county's failure to support an individual through what is most likely the most vulnerable time in their life.
Mm-hmm.
Because when someone engages in taboo, even if it's sitting on the corner at 7-Eleven with some drugs, they're in some way communicating that they're alienated from society. And there needs to be some sort of move to bring them back into the fold, but not one that will simply extricate them from society or ostracize them.
Well, a couple things, like I don't necessarily think that that's signaling, that they're alienated from society. And I do think that what is more alienating and than incarcerating a person? Like,
Right.
Truly, there's and people use that as a justification to continue to incarcerate people. But if we're about supporting communities and supporting people being involved and integrated in their communities, incarceration is definitely not the way to, invest in community building. That's for sure. And I think that there is a lack of investment in other ways to be, there's just a lack of investment in community, period.
It's two wrongs don't make a right.
Yeah, I would 100% agree. Like, there have been, I remember, I think it was watching a podcast reading up on a case of a guy who got falsely accused of murder, and he came out, went to jail, I believe, in the early 2000s or the late 90s, and he came out in the early 2010s and was having nervous breakdowns because of all the information and the technological advancements, and he really couldn't, he just couldn't deal with it. And he, I think I remember him saying, he doesn't remember much of the first year or 2 years he was out because he was just operating off of, flight or flight and couldn't, had a hard time processing life as it was. So, I completely agree with you on the idea that, jails and the prison systems don't actually, reform. They're kind of just there to hold people. And then there's also issues of, people being used almost as slaves within them as well. I partially agree with you, but I also disagree on the abolition. I do think the state of police right now is not ideal, but law enforcement, having someone to enforce rules is necessary. The way it's being done now, I think we both can agree, is not nowhere close to being ideal whatsoever. There should for sure be programs to help people actually reform, so we don't have people just coming in and out of the prison system because that's all they know.
I often accuse these guys of having a lack of imagination about possible alternatives to policing.
Oh, no, I would love, I think...
But there's still this underlying need to have somebody there,
right,
with a uniform and a
gun.
Because
I think inevitably, largely, the things you're talking about, environmental things, as opposed to why people commit these crimes. He brings it up all the time. And I think you guys are completely right about that, 100%. The people who are just born and grow up in situations, and that's all they know. So compared to the average day person, and they will do things or whatever. But, these people need attention and care so they can be more embraced by society. That I completely agree with. But there will almost always be at least one person that is just not, they just want to do bad things. There's almost nothing you can do about it, I feel like. So that would be the reason why law enforcement would be there. But also you can't just also have government gangs running around and just
killing,
right,
murdering.
Yeah,
people.
No, you can't have that either. So what's the middle ground?
No, it's abolition or nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, not or nothing, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
but one thing that the JusticeLA Coalition, always reiterates is that we're not going to support a policy that eventually we'll have to fight against. And so reformist policy is just like that. And one thing you said, definitely caught my attention, and that's that, police enforce, quote, the rules. And you mean the penal codes and laws. And the thing about penal codes is they are grounded in structures of white cisgender heteropatriarchy,
mm-hmm.
meaning that the laws are written to marginalize and criminalize queer people, Black people, immigrants, poor people. And so if one justification for maintaining police is, well, someone's got to be there to enforce the laws.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, the pushback against that is, well, get rid of the laws.
Oh, I would agree.
You know, and so,
I don't necessarily disagree with you with that at all.
Crime is an ideological construct, and you could equally say that
I don't know if I agree with that, but there's for sure history of laws that they have horrible history and where they come from, and blah 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 blah. That's a whole discussion we could get into later.
You could recontextualize it by saying that most crime is committed by police against and guards in prisons against the public and those in prisons, because that's the violence that is keeping people down. And if you were to aggregate
like a humanitarian
the
crisis.
physical violence in the world, you know, most of it would be committed by those in some sort of power.
Right, they're treating
right.
people in prisons like animals, but they're not. They're human
Right,
beings.
yeah,
Okay, yeah.
yeah,
I could,
yeah.
yeah.
And also one thing, you know, you did say, Sonny, like, what about the one person that just wants to do bad things, you know? Well, again, why? Like, is it because they are bipolar and they just haven't received the mental health care they need? Like, also...
Oh, no, I'm not saying they should not receive health
yeah,
care.
I-
No, 100%.
But one person or a handful of people should not be the reason why we continue to perpetuate a system that disenfranchises and enacts violence upon millions.
I agree.
Of people.
Well, that's why that's why I'm more in favor of community policing, because if you have people who are actually involved in the community and they genuinely know the people that are there, they have less incentive to just treat them like animal, and they're like, oh, that's John from down the street. He's having a rough time. Let me go take him here so he can actually get rehabilitated, as opposed to just throw this random dude we don't know in a prison.
Well, I think there are a lot of issues with community policing because you know, it's not entirely community. It's okay. One huge issue we see with community policing is the Citizen app. You know this? Have you heard of Citizen?
I have not, no.
Oh gosh, this is do not go on Citizen. It's no endorsement, but of Citizen at all. This app needs to just die immediately because it's people who think there's some sort of these vigilantes of justice.
Oh gosh, okay.
You know, so. But they say this is community policing. I see an unhoused neighbor just down the street from my house. Somebody called in put in on the Citizen app. I see somebody waving a knife next to the 101. Do you know what the response to that was? So first off, the sheriff's department and LAPD are deep in the Citizen app. So they'll see this. They sent 2 SWAT vans, 2 helicopters. It was a 6-hour standoff with somebody experiencing a mental health crisis that came from somebody thinking they're doing community policing. And so obviously that's like an extreme example, but community policing, it also still says it's also about enforcement, law enforcement. It's community policing. It's not called alternative crisis response or restorative justice in community setting. It's called community policing, which still centers the structure that is, you know, continuously surveilling and enacting violence upon community.
On the one hand, there is the response to people who are engaging in some sort of taboo or need help in some other way with a state social response, and then there are the things we need to do to prevent people from getting into that situation in the first place, addressing the problems that led to that personality disorder. But people fall through the cracks. Those personality disorders do exist and develop as best we can, and we won't always be there to prevent them from happening. So at some level, there needs to be, I'm arguing
Are you arguing my point?
Well, no,
some place to put them, right?
not prison.
Right.
I would agree.
You know,
Yeah.
definitely not prison.
We don't want like an Arkham Asylum. You know, like, people don't deserve that.
Yeah, or a locked mental health asylum. Like, what if again, and I understand that his brother was the one that said, no, don't release him. This guy's got narcissistic personality disorder.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, but again, has the brother been offered any other vision for what care for his incarcerated brother could look like? Like, what if
Offer me that vision.
yeah, what if
Yeah.
once he was released on parole, he was able to maintain a steady job and receive outpatient mental health care, counseling 7 days a week? This individual gets to, as a condition of his parole, but again, I'm not about any supervising conditions. I think that that's a whole another issue of once somebody is released, what does the state's next form of incarceration of this person look like? But if this person has a serious narcissistic personality disorder, they should be going to having a counseling, group therapy, individualized therapy, alternative modes of therapy. Like what else is supporting this man? Does he have guaranteed basic income? Is he, fighting to just make $1, or is he able to, have some sort of monetary base that he can go and get a job and rent an apartment and have a car so he can go and drive to his therapist appointment, or be able to afford a Metro card to get to his therapist appointment, maybe multiple chunks of therapy. He's in therapy in the morning, he gets lunch, he has group therapy in the afternoon. What is he doing at night? He's doing some sort of community service. This is another vision, but the thing is also this was not introduced to this individual throughout the time period he's been incarcerated. These aspects of care are often only brought to an individual while they're incarcerated by other incarcerated individuals who are interested in creating community that isn't about, violence and retribution, and really is about caring for one another. And I see this with programs that we have at Dignity and Power Now, led by a colleague of mine, James Nelson, who was incarcerated on a life sentence for a murder he didn't commit. And once he got out, while he was inside, he organized with people he was incarcerated with.
Mm-hmm.
And then once he got out, he's created this program called Forever Rooted, where if you have been released from jail or prison in California, you get in touch with James, and it's support groups that run, weekly, and they've been doing this for over 6 years at this point. And so James saw an alternative, and he saw what care and community can do for people who are coming out of prison. And so, potentially this guy with narcissistic personality disorder just hasn't been shown that there are ways of living in community and living with care and compassion as at the forefront, because he's been inside, potentially just exposed to violence and discrimination and white supremacy.
I kind of agree with you. For sure. Mental health care, 100%. Shouldn't be treated like an animal in prison, 100%. But I don't...
There's some aspect of the old maxim that if you don't want help, you can't be helped.
Yeah, sure. I guess I could vibe with that for sure. But I think there's for sure an issue of what will he do if he's not given these things properly and he's just let back out onto the streets. Obviously, you're not advocating for that either. Not at all. And I don't want to try to make it seem like you are in any way whatsoever. I think him being in some sort of mental institution for not even like a year or whatever, for X amount of weeks or months where he's given proper care and can get the things that he needs to make sure he isn't a threat to other people, I'm fine. There's some more so how I would prefer it to be, not just, throwing this guy in prison because he...
There's a challenge in engineering the environment around somebody who's been released or would otherwise go to jail, that they would choose to have, that would be best for them. And that seems to be impossible at first glance. Like, how do you engineer an environment that is different for everybody and yet bureaucratically deployable?
How do you quantify mental health?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the key to not incarcerating them is to have them choose the help that they get to choose to live a better life and to offer them that choice. And if you can't envision the environment that would give them the help they need, and they can't either, or else maybe they wouldn't be in that position, then what do you do with them? You know, that seems to be the problem that we have been trying to solve with prison for the last 200 years.
Well, I think that prisons were designed to incarcerate the most marginalized members of society. Like, there was no problem that prisons were designed to solve. Like, the problem is a threat to white supremacy and capitalism, and
Based on the outcomes that the prisons have given us.
based on the prison industrial complex. It was created and designed to maintain white supremacy and maintain capitalism and period. Like, if actually a system was designed to address the problem, which is, again, underinvestment in humans and people and communities, then if that was the problem that people were trying to solve, the solution to that would not have been the prison industrial complex. And, I think we shouldn't get hung up on just a single person,
Right.
from Reddit whose brother was like,
Yeah.
don't release him, because abolition is about everyone, including that guy, and there needs to be investment in these alternatives, and then public attention on these alternatives, so then people understand that they are a choice.
We give them those options.
Yes, for
and,
sure.
and everyone those options.
Everyone.
Us.
Yeah.
Giving everyone the opportunity to become out a better person from just in general.
Or just give everyone the opportunity to not get there in the first place.
Because a lot of what is being prosecuted is not a problem.
No.
I would agree with
Yeah.
that, yeah.
Yeah.
There's a lot of unnecessary litigious laws that just don't need to exist.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of enforcement of laws that just... There's a lot of laws, again, don't need to exist. And then there's gross enforcement of laws that just aren't necessary at all either.
So we got that you went to law school and that you focus on local politics. How did you get interested in community? Were you just interested in community organizing and politics from a young age, and this was where you were going to go, where you're going to end up?
Yes, I would say yes, for sure. My family has felt the impacts of incarceration personally, my mother's side of the family, and my father was a public defender for 40-something years, and so I started learning about the system when I was, extremely young, and seeing how it tears apart families. And then I also learned from my father about, he may at that time may not have described himself as an abolitionist. The way that he answered any question that I had certainly pointed in the direction of, we need to not incarcerate people and we need to invest in the well-being of every single person. And so I think also it's interesting to think about young organizers, because when I was growing up and in high school and even in early college, I didn't understand that there was a framework or term for what I was doing. So where I went to college, the way that women were treated was almost as if we were in the 1950s. And there were just horrible statistics and personal experiences of women at the university who, were experiencing rampant sexual harassment and assault. And we started doing consciousness raising around just feminism and around talking about sexual harassment and assault and rape on campus. And at that time, I didn't realize, oh, this is organizing. Like, and we had a campaign. And so I think I've always been organizing in some way or another, just not labeling it that way. And then I went to law school, and at law school I clerked for the public defender's office, and then I did some policy work, which was fulfilling, but also I was organizing on the side, realizing, oh, actually, if I could just devote all my time to organizing, abolitionist organizing, spending, all of my capacity on really trying to break down the systems of mass incarceration. The thing about organizing and having a legal background is you're not having to work within the confines of the law. Public defenders, they are also incredible organizers. But here in LA County, like, the public defenders are so overworked and underinvested in, they don't have the time to spend on advocacy because they have, potentially 800 cases a year for one attorney. That is wild.
It's too much work.
It's too much work.
You can't properly do your job like
you can't properly do your job. And so, and you're also working within the confines of the law, and you don't have the time to try to change those laws because you are overworked. And so having the position of an organizer is, I can fight to change the laws. And I also can support somebody going through the criminal legal process. While I'm not their attorney, I can be their court support, help translate what they're going through, translate the court materials and support them and their families as they're going through this, while also then having the time to push back and try to change the laws.
I imagine that's very rewarding.
I mean, I don't know what, like, I just love being around people who share this value system. And so, and getting to connect with people, it's definitely more fulfilling than sitting behind a desk.
We're gonna be interviewing Holly Mitchell and George
Potentially.
Gascon
Yeah.
coming up.
Cool.
And one other council member, I can't remember. But is there anything that you really want to ask Holly Mitchell or Gascon, for that matter?
Well, I actually want to thank Holly Mitchell. Holly Mitchell has been a champion for investing in alternatives to incarceration. And I look to Holly Mitchell as like a leader on the Board of Supervisors when it comes to actually implementing and like living by the Care First, Jails Last
Agenda.
Yeah, for real. So no questions, just gratitude. Gratitude for Holly Mitchell. I guess, okay. If I had the chance to ask Holly Mitchell a question directly, it would be, what's her plan to set a concrete date for the closure of Men's Central Jail? So the county, the Board of Supervisors, has voted on multiple motions that say, yes, let's close Men's Central Jail. But they haven't given a timeline for it. And one of the demands from our coalition is that the board set a concrete timeline for jail closure and close Men's Central Jail by March 2025. So that's 2 years from now. And we want the county to commit to that timeline openly and publicly. So my question for Holly Mitchell would be, when are you going to do that? And when are you going to set the concrete date for jail closure? And for George Gascon, I have so many questions. I think that it must be hard for him when faced with internal opposition in his office, where George Gascon has come in with, the myth of a progressive prosecutor a real thing, to be honest? Like, is that real, or is it just a myth? But we know that George Gascon has faced internal opposition from prosecutors who think that he's being, quote, soft on crime. And I would just love to hear from him about his experiences, if he can talk about it. I'm sure that there are, like regulations and restrictions of what he can talk about publicly. And also, I would love to know directly from him the impact that he saw of the emergency bail order. So here in LA, from March 2020 until July 2022, the county implemented what's called the emergency bail order. Because of COVID, they wanted to reduce crowding inside of the jails. And so under the emergency bail order, people, most misdemeanors, you were released on your own recognizance. You were not held in on bail unless there was sort of a demonstrated justification of why you should be held in. And so this resulted in tens of thousands of people who would potentially have been held in were actually released. And I want to hear from Gascon, did he see an impact of that? Did he see, quote, what media narratives have described as a, quote, rise in crime, even though there was no rise in crime? You had Michael Moore, chief of the LAPD, during, I think it was definitely 2021, if not 2022, saying publicly, oh, these smash and grabs, these retail thefts, this is a direct result of the emergency bail order. Not true. And so I would love to hear from George Gascon, what sort of impact the emergency bail order had on the way that his office was working. And, we have on record from the Office of the Inspector General here in LA County that the jail population went up after the rescission of the emergency bail order. So we know that more people are in jail because the county rescinded this bail order. So I would love to hear from Gascon, what policies the DA can take now that the emergency bail order is rescinded, what policies the DA can take to try to mimic the conditions of the emergency bail order in order to, continue to sort of reduce the jail population.
Because that is, a general good. It's just to have less people in prison, especially in pretrial.
Yes.
Overall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Do you think the emergency relief thing was, God, I already forgot the name of it. Do you think it was ultimately a good thing?
Oh, it's a very good
Yeah.
thing, and I actually think that the county should reinstate the emergency bail order for many reasons. COVID has not disappeared. We can't act like COVID is not around anymore. Well, the transmission rates are different than they were, 2021. COVID is still around, and people in jails are getting COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do think, and also what we saw, and we do need hard data for this, and it's actually really hard. This is about government transparency. It would be great if we could get this data. It's how many people that were released on the emergency bail order then went on to be rearrested, And
Right.
so I think that the emergency bail order should be reinstated and should actually just be the bail policy of LA County.
One thing I was curious about was how JusticeLA is using data, especially mass data, in its policies, and how you think that data collection has affected the policing policies over the last decade or so.
So we use data. We use a lot of data, and we're so grateful to coalition member orgs and partners who do the real data science. I'm thinking of $1 Million Hoods out of UCLA and the Vera Institute of Justice, their California work. They have an incredible thing called the Care First Jails Last dashboard. They both have an LA County specific one, and now I think it was just last week, they launched a statewide one where you can look at any county in California and look at how many people are incarcerated in that county, both in jails and prisons. How many people are pretrial? What are the racial demographics? So when you look at LA County, I have the numbers here. Right now, 54.7% of the people in LA County jails are Latinx. And this is relative. They're 48% of the general population. This statistic is wild. So 29% of people in LA County jails are Black. Black people make up only 8% of LA County's population. So to me, immediately that
Something's
represents
wrong there.
the over-policing of Black communities in LA. They are arrested at rates higher than their representation in the general population. And so we use data every day to show the racial disparities in incarceration, and we rely on big organizations that do intense data collection and robust data collection. So Vera's California dashboard, you can look at any county, you can also see the opportunity cost. So for what it costs to incarcerate one person, any county in California, and it breaks it down. Tulare County could actually be spending $2,000 on guaranteed basic income per month. So it shows the opportunity cost of incarceration as well. And then, here in LA County, when we need and when we rely on data related to arrests and related to law enforcement, it really, community members are at such a disadvantage because the data is, undertaken and reported only by the sheriff's department and the police department. So when we're relying on arrest data and, quote, crime rates, that is coming directly from the sheriff's department and police department. The sheriff's and police department have a financial incentive to be reporting high instances of crime because they want their $3.9 million check billion check every year.
Right, that's an issue with like them having quotas and whatnot.
Yeah, and so so the fact that we can really only rely upon they're the county's controller of crime data, and they also have a financial incentive. Like, the data is going to be biased,
Right?
So that's how the law enforcement data affects our work, is the fact that we still have to rely on the data provided by the sheriff's department. Also, if you want to, this is their publicly reported data. If you want to get any other data, you're going to be filing public records requests to the sheriff's department, ad nauseum. Honestly, it's like a fight to get any information. And so something that we as a coalition have been advocating for around our jail closure campaign is public reported data on the pretrial population. So publicly reported data on the emergency bail schedule impacts. So, how many people were actually rearrested when they were released. We also want data related to mental health beds. So one thing that we hear over and over again from the county is we can't close the jail because there's nowhere to put individuals who are experiencing mental health issues. And we have been fighting for data. How many mental health beds, so these are either community-based treatment beds, larger institution beds, how many beds are available? Who's tracking the availability?
Transparency. How much time and resources are you actually putting into helping those people?
Right. And also, if we could even get that accounting from the police and sheriff's department, that would be amazing. What's an hour-by-hour day for a deputy? Because in LA County, over 40 cities in LA County, and we had a campaign in West Hollywood, over 40 cities in LA County contract with the sheriff's department to provide services, meaning employees, deputies, vehicles. So West Hollywood spends over $21 million a year in their contract with the sheriff's department. That comes out to almost $400,000 for one deputy. I believe it was in 2020 that the sheriff's department, this is a beautiful statistic, the West Hollywood Sheriff's Department, with their $21 million a year contract, out of over 300 cell phones that were stolen, they retrieved 2. So West Hollywood was paying $400,000 for a deputy to not do anything, And what we did in West Hollywood was show, okay, we know that the sheriff's department is charging West Hollywood, I believe it was $5 million around for, quote, and this is their wording, homelessness outreach. So, that's just picking them up and dropping them off somewhere. So as part of their contract with West Hollywood, that's how much the sheriff's department was charging for their homelessness outreach. So we as a coalition said, okay, just cut the contract by that much money because we know they're not doing outreach, and take that money and actually invest it in real outreach to unhoused communities. So we tried to do that. And we definitely got pushback because as soon as you say cut a contract with the sheriff's department, the, defund the police sirens come on, and,
right.
Everyone's saying, well, this the defund police movement has come to West Hollywood. People are really upset, but we did encourage the West Hollywood City Council to cut $1.7 million of their contract and invest in this other form of security, which we definitely were not in support of, which are block by block ambassadors, unarmed. But again, to us, that's actually just reproducing the security state, because who are the block by block ambassadors going to ultimately call probably is the sheriff's department. But so we tried to get data related to that, what is the instance of actually solving any sort of issue in West Hollywood, such as stolen cell phones. It took us doing a ton of public records requests. We were trying to understand, how does a West Hollywood sheriff's deputy spend his time, so you can account for, okay, if you're paying somebody $400,000 a year, paying the department $400,000 a year, their time should be accounted for, right? And that's data that we weren't able to get. We don't know, because they don't have to, clock in exactly what they're doing every hour.
I don't like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I am way more in favor of government transparency and us being able to just have a breakdown of how things are being
Public
spent.
can exercise their powers by knowing what's happening.
Earlier, you had mentioned the release of prisoners. Do you think that an unintended consequence of the prison system being what it is could have resulted in crime going up for a short time, or at all, possibly?
We covered the emergency order too.
Oh, yeah, the
right?
emergency
yeah,
bail
that's
order.
what it is.
Yeah.
Do I
And
think that there was a rise in crime?
do you think that there was a rise in? Would you expect that there was a rise in crime, as reported by the sheriff's office too? Right.
No.
Yeah.
Really?
No. Yeah.
Okay.
No.
Why is that?
Why do I think there wasn't?
Yes.
I mean, there is no data really there is no data to substantiate that claim that there was, quote, a rise in crime. They'll focus on a few specific things when making that argument. So, maybe there was a rise in retail theft, but there was a decrease in homicide. Again, that's not exactly what they said. I need to look again at, okay, what were their exact justifications? But no, I don't think. And for also other reasons, it was lockdown. And so, it was lockdown when the emergency bail order was in effect. And I think that during that period of time, there were less arrests. Also, when we think of crime data, we're actually only, again, relying upon arrest data, which is at its core racially biased. And it, again, so many people are arrested for not doing anything wrong.
I don't disagree with that at all.
And
Yeah.
so if that's the data that we're relying upon to say there's a, quote, rise in crime, then we're relying upon data that's inherently racially biased. That's inherently biased because it's collected by the sheriff's department that has a financial incentive in reporting high rates of crime. So we need non-sheriff's department data that shows, okay, actually, and again, though, how do you actually quantify this? If it's not coming from arrest rates, if it's not coming from prosecution rates, which again are inherently racially biased, and maintained and collected by the sheriff's department.
So part of the alternative vision to policing is a collection of big data on what people are doing that indicates that they would need help from the state or from the communities.
No.
That's just a surveillance
Yeah,
state.
hell no.
Right?
Hell no
Yeah.
to that. Yeah, no predictive policing,
No.
Surveillance, no collection of big data, because that may be on the face said, okay, this is in order to not arrest people, it's so we can intervene. But again, who has access to that data? Who's controlling that data? Who's doing the intervention? Also, who's to use an algorithm to say whether or not somebody needs mental health care?
Yeah, no, that's a little shady to say at the least.
Well, you
Just
need some
great.
sort of large-scale studies to determine that alternatives to policing are leading to a reduction in harms to society, right? So you need to quantify that in some way.
Yeah, well, you can look to models such as, I believe it's in Denver, it's it's called Denver Star. It's alternative crisis response. So a lot of people who have been murdered by the sheriff's department here in LA County, they were experiencing a mental health crisis, and the cops were called, and they were killed as a result of this. And in Denver, they have this what's called an alternative crisis response model that does not involve law enforcement. So an individual who is experiencing a mental health crisis someone who's around them can call STAR. And this community-based model will come and support. And again, there's clinicians there, social workers. It's not just random individuals who are supporting with this intervention. And I think it's shown that there has been a reduction in police violence against communities, and also a reduction in people experiencing mental health issues, a reduction in their contact with the criminal legal system.
Really?
Yeah.
Where can I find those statistics?
Denver
Yeah.
Star.
Denver
Google,
Star.
Denver Star program.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We could bring that up with Gascon and see what
Yeah,
what he's
I
talking
think
about there.
LA County is trying to implement alternative crisis response models. Definitely. I think that we need to invest. The county needs to invest in those, and the county needs to invest in models that aren't co-response models. So a lot of people invest, or a lot of counties are interested in co-response models where it's, mental health clinicians co-responding with law enforcement. No, law enforcement needs to be taken out of the equation, for real. And so I think LA County needs to follow the lead of cities like Denver in implementing alternative crisis response models that don't involve law enforcement, and invest in those. Yeah.
I'll look at that later, but I
Yeah.
found the website.
Oh,
That is
good.
very
Cool.
interesting.
We have a link tree where it has a bunch of different stuff. You can sign up for Justice LA newsletter there. You can sign up for the virtual action, which is the virtual way that we organize. And our link tree has links to all of our social media stuff and any recent press releases or statements we put out. And that's linktree/JLA now. And it's linktr.ee/JLA now. Yeah. Then you can follow our work there.